All right, we are ready for Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is going to deal with animals and looking specifically as to how animals are classified in a couple of those steps of classification that we have discussed previously in our book. So as we get through Chapter 4, Lesson 1, this is a shorter lesson and a lot of recapping those topics that we've been introduced to in our previous book, Ecology, and then our first couple of chapters here in this. So the first thing that we need to take note of is this particular statement. All animals are multicellular organisms, right? So we know that they are eukaryotic. They have more than one cell. Those cells have specific parts to them, different chemicals, organelles with specific jobs, and will create the organism that we're talking about. And all animals are going to feed on other organisms. They are not producers, they are consumers. So they're either going to eat plants, they're going to be animals, or they're going to eat both. And they perform the same basic functions. So all animals are multicellular organisms that feed on other organisms and perform the same basic functions. It's a key piece of information, and there will be a test over chapter 4. So the four functions that we're talking about when it comes to animals is one, they are going to work on obtaining food and oxygen, right? So as long as they have oxygen, they can breathe. As long as they have food, they can continue to live and thrive and grow and do the different basic functions that they need to do. The second one is they're going to strive internally to keep homeostasis. And once again, that is the balance that goes inside the same body temperature, the same respirations, the same heart rate, everything working the way it is supposed to do. The third one is they move in some way. So we have four different examples here. We have a rabbit that hops and runs. We have a horse that runs and gallops. We have birds that fly, right? So all animals are going to move in some way. And then the fourth one is they reproduce, right? So once again, if they are in the same species, then they are able to reproduce offspring that are able to reproduce. When we look at animals, we also talk about how they have different adaptations. So once again, we're still on page 139 in your book. And the number one thing that we look at on how they are classified and one of their adaptations is that they have different types of teeth, right? So we have incisors, we have canine, we have premolars, molars. The molars, once again, are those large, wide, flat teeth that are there to grind. So if we have animals that are going to eat plants, then we know that they have molars and premolars. Incisors are designed to cut and to tear. So some herbivores are going to have molars and incisors. And then the canine are the sharp, pointy teeth that are designed to grab a hold of, to tear um, in order to eat. Another thing when we look at different adaptations is we could talk about opposable thumbs, right? So you and I have opposable thumbs. We're able to pick things up, pinching it between our thumb and our fingers. Um, we know that different apes, different monkeys have opposable thumbs, but when you look at dogs and cats, they don't have an opposable thumb. So they don't have that adaptation that allows them to pick things up with their hands or with their paws, so then they end up having to pick things up with their teeth. Different types of limbs are an adaptation. Some are designed to have a knee that goes backwards, some have a knee that goes forwards. Some have hollow bones in their appendages, some have wings attached to their arms. So limbs are an adaptation that determines how an animal is going to do its four basic functions. A giraffe would be an example of an organism that has an adaptation because its long neck allows it to eat the leaves at the top of the trees that other organisms are not competing for, where shorter animals such as rhinoceros and elephants, they're going to be eating the leaves at the bottom of the trees. And then some animals or marsupials have pouches, such as the kangaroo, that allows the tiny baby kangaroo to develop inside of the pouch as it's growing because when it's first born, it is so unprotected, it's not able to take care of itself. Different types of teeth also are more developed. So a beaver's teeth are orange or deep yellow because they have such a protective outer coating that allows them to cut down trees and use them in their daily lives. So when we look at all the different species in the world, we're talking about a lot of different things. And each different species has different characteristics from every other species in the world. So it becomes quite complicated when we're going through the diversity of life and being able to identify and classify each species according to its own category. So when we look at those steps, once again, classifying, it's important to be able to go through this process and identify all of those different things that make them unique. So in this particular chapter 4, that's each of these sections is going to be talking about different orders or different genus or different species and what makes them their own unique individual selves. So once again, the way that you can remember the order of classification is let's do keep plates clean or family gets sick. So we start looking at the idea of phylums. And the phylum is the idea of being able to look at body structure, those adaptations. Does it have wings? Does it have backwards kneecaps? Does it have forward kneecaps? Is it designed to hop? Is it designed to fly? Those different body structures that are developed through the DNA, which puts them into their different phylums. So once again, DNA is your deoxyribonucleic acid, which is all the genetic material inside of your cells that tell each cell what they're supposed to do. When we look at the body structures then, we have two different phylum that we're going to be looking at. Right? So in your book, you'll see two separate pages talking about invertebrates and vertebrates. So invertebrates are all of those organisms that do not have a backbone. So we've talked about some of these already as we were introducing some of the different classifications in chapter 1. But when we talk about flatworms, jellyfish, sponges, we talk about mollusks. We talk about arthropods and arachnids. Those are all different organisms. They don't have a backbone. But then when we start specifically talking about the animals that do have a backbone, hopefully you remember when we talked about in chapter 1, the 5 different categories that we talked about when it comes to vertebrates. So we have mammals, which is the category that you and I are in, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish, where 2 of those are always going to be warm-blooded organisms, and the other 3 are cold-blooded, which means they adapt to the temperature that they are around. So in our previous book, we talked about, or previous sections, we talked about how these organisms, when we look at them, we should be able to identify if they have a backbone or not. So in your book, you have those 2 main categories, how everything is going to be broken up into cnidarians and sponges and arthropods, which are insects, compared to the 5 main things, such as mammals and birds and reptiles and amphibians and fish. So when we look at a mammal, such as a cow, right? So when we look in the far right, then we're talking about organisms that are warm-blooded. They have hair, they give birth to live young, and then they give their young milk in order to survive in those uh, few months of development. Arthropods are those things that we consider insects. Mollusks are going to be a double-shelled organism, and then birds have feathers and they are warm-blooded and they are able to fly. The mammals and birds, which if we would look at their skeletons, they have a backbone, right? All of their appendages are going to connect to a nervous system that is inside of that backbone, where arthropods and mollusks, they don't have an internal skeleton, let alone a backbone. All right, so when we look at this first set of questions, what is a vertebrate? Hopefully you know now that, or already knew, that it is an animal with a backbone. And how are vertebrates and invertebrates alike, and how are they different? Well, they're both animals, right? They're both going to have those cells and things that classify them as a living organism. But the main difference between the two is that the vertebrates have a backbone where the invertebrates do not. So this is a very short section. The rest of the chapter sections are going to be longer, but you'll be able to take these notes in one class, and then tomorrow, which should be Thursday, you'll have the assignment and hopefully be able to do it real well. Most of this stuff is just a review, but continue to work well for my subs and do what you're supposed to do and stay caught up. And if you're quarantined like myself, please stay up with taking your notes, doing your work. That way, when you get back, it's not trying to catch up before we have to do midterms and things like that once again.